Hey everybody, time for Master Game Analysis number 3. Today I have a randomly selected game. I've done some filters on the selection this time. I tried to get players above 2400, both players, and I made sure that I tried to make sure it wasn't a blitz game. It didn't say blitz anywhere in the PGN file, so hopefully we won't run into the same problem we ran into last time or the previous two times. I also have pictures of the players, just kind of the first decent picture I found on the internet with a Google search. So they're ready to go. Um, we have Sambuev and Novikov. Don't know either of the players by name or by anything else. Honestly, I'm not one that keeps up with all that kind of stuff. So I don't know either player. They're both rated pretty near 2,500. Both grandmasters according to the searches that I did. So it should be an interesting game. Uh, as usual, not going to spend a lot of time in the opening, and I'm going to also try to not spend 45 minutes on this game like I did last time. 30 minutes would be a good maximum, and I'll see if I can keep it under that. And I'll try not to ramble about one thing for 10 or 15 minutes like I did last time. So, moving forward through a d4 opening, d5, Queen's Gambit, and this is Queen's Gambit declined. So, knight c3, pretty sure this is mainline stuff. Knight f6 would be next. Yep. So here, the idea here is that c4's pawn, or white c4 pawn is hanging, but it can be recaptured fairly easily with some activity. Black declines to give that activity and just develops normally. That's what's going on in this opening. Okay, pinning the knight to the queen. I'm sure this is mainline stuff. I'm not a Queen's Gambit player, although I'm trying to become one, and here's why. And I know I have at least one person that's going to laugh at this part, but it all goes back to the French defense, right? The French defense has this structure in the center for black. And one thing that, when I was first starting out in chess, I knew how to play against d4 because I would choose the French defense. And I studied that and I was comfortable with that. But I never knew what to do against d4. So I asked a fairly strong chess player, a friend of mine, what I should do if my opponent plays d4, and he said just play e6 anyway. E6 and d5 will probably work against a lot of the d4 openings that white could do. So go ahead and try it for a while and see what you think. So what has been happening lately is in a lot of blitz games I will get into some Queen's Gambit declined kind of positions. So this position's not entirely unfamiliar to me. So this structure here, once again, is comfortable. I would be a lot more comfortable with an e4 or e5 just because that's familiar. It's not something that I would want to happen positionally. Obviously, a pawn on e5 is a little cramping for black. So anyway, these positions are somewhat comfortable for me. I'm no expert. I probably don't know some basic things about these opening lines. So I'm going to be learning along with anybody else that doesn't know it. I think this is called now I don't know this, but I think this is called the Slav or semi-Slav. And I learned this from watching Curtains videos. And if you don't know what I mean by Curtains videos, Curtains is a player on ICC, and his real name is Greg Shahade, and he's an international master. But he records all sorts of live videos of him playing Blitz, and he records some other videos as well. But I think he's really well known for his 5-minute Blitz videos, and I've seen him play some Slav type things. And offhand, I don't remember whether he likes to play the Slav or if he just gets into them a lot, playing against it as white. But I have seen these. I do know that in the Queen's Gambit declined with this sort of light square pawn formation here is either Slav or semi-Slav. It makes me think it's semi-Slav. And I'm going to look it up afterwards. I have a guess about what makes it a Slav and what makes it a semi-Slav, and I have a guess that it's to do with the light square bishop, but I don't know. I don't know. It's only a guess. I'll look it up after the game. So moving forward, this is probably mainline stuff. I am going to go a couple more moves before I slow down and really start to assess the position. And I'm 100% sure at this level, all of this is theory or prepared moves. So it wouldn't be. There's black taking on c4. I would guess here, and this is a theory of mine. I don't play these positions very well or know much about them, but my guess here is black will take on c4 when he thinks it's going to happen without giving white a lot of activity. So how would black go about holding on to the c4 pawn, and how is white going to go about trying to capture the c4 pawn, or is white just going to ignore that? Well, one thing that always seems to happen in these positions is that the knight on c3 is stopping that pawn from suiciding itself, trading it off, or whatever. It's blockading it, in other words. Knights are good blockaders, so knight c3. Say earlier, let's just jump back real quick. Say earlier in the game, if here instead black had taken on c4, and that happens, that's called the Queen's Gambit accepted, then I'm 99% sure that the next move is going to be knight c3 almost every time. And that's just to keep the pawn from moving down to c3. I think there are probably some things that can happen if c3 is played. So going back to where we were, and I'm not going to know how far ahead we were. I'm going to go forward until, oops, went one move too far, but that's okay. White ignores c4 for now. Oh, no, it doesn't ignore it. I'm sorry. No. I was looking at the light square bishop, and I was going to talk about the bishop on... here's why I said he ignored it. I was looking on the light square bishop on f1 earlier, because that is going to be the piece that most likely recaptures on c4. And so I had in my head real quick there that if white plays e3, then that would solidify d4 and open up the light square bishop to capture c4. So when I didn't see e3 as the next move, I just thought, okay, he ignored it. But no. E4 doesn't ignore a thing. It just takes more of the center than e3 would have. So that's why I misspoke briefly there. Okay, so e4 is going to take the center and threaten to recapture c4. And if white does recapture, then materials. Even if white doesn't recapture, then black is up a pawn and can play things like b5. I mean, b5 is a possibility to play here for black as it is, to try to hold on to the material. White comes with the threat, however, of e5 here. e5 is the tactic because the knight is pinned, can't move. So in the variation, black plays b5, white plays e5. And black would probably have to play something like g5, bishop g3, and then the knight can move to wherever. So in that position, black's pawns are a complete mess. There's going to be very little development for black. This looks just really good for white. So black is going to need to deal with the threat of e5, which is going to throw things for a complete loop for black. So how is that going to happen? Black could move the queen. Black could play g5 now. But, the pawns are still going to kind of stink over there. So I'm not sure that's going to be black's best move. Is there any way that black can deal with the threat of e5 and protect the pawn on c4 at the same time? Probably not. So most likely the move here is going to be bishop e7. That's my guess. Black needs to develop, get castled, those kinds of things. So bishop e7, e5, knight d7 are going to be the next moves, I would think, or if e5. I shouldn't say e5 will be the next move for white. Who knows? But bishop e7 removes the threat of e5. So next move, bishop e7. If e5, then knight d7 is what I would say. So let's look. Okay, so black decides that I don't know what I'm talking about on the pawns, which is usually true, and plays g5. But I was right that black needed to defend against e5 somehow. So he takes a little bit more active role there. I've got email. It's from Pizza Hut if you're interested. I hate getting spammed by Pizza Hut. But there's a special $9 large 3-topping pizzas if anybody cares. All right. So bishop g3 seems very, very natural. I mean, there could be some horrendous sacrifice on g5, getting 2 pawns for a piece and lots of activity. But, you know what? Let's look at it. I mean, why not? I would say the center will become open, so we'll want to hold on to the bishop in this case. So let's look at the sacrifice here. Black still has to deal with e5, though is that any big deal? So looking at this position, does white have enough compensation for the piece for 2 pawns sacrifice that he's made? In fact, not only, if you count the position, or if you count the material here, white has 7 pawns, black has 6 pawns, so it's actually a piece for 1 pawn. since white was already down a pawn. So this is probably way too speculative and nothing concrete. So we're going to say that bishop g3 is probably forced here. Okay, good. Moving on. Black now has a fractured kingside safety for his kingside castling. Queenside castling would be way down the line here. I mean, we're going to have to move 3 pieces in order to castle queenside. And then if you do castle queenside, the king's on c8, which is not safe at all. You have a bishop slicing right into the camp. You have still lots of pieces on the board for white, and that can go down the light square diagonal on h3 down to c8. Of course, you have a pawn there right now on e6. But it's still a little uncomfortable to have all those pieces that can just dive right in. So neither side is real safe right here. Even if you can get the king to c8 by queenside castling, you're going to have to get to b8, and b8 is attacked currently by the dark square bishops. So queenside castling doesn't look very good. Black might want to close up the center here, lock it up as tightly as he can, and then keep the king right where it is, or e7 maybe. But already I just do not feel comfortable with the move g5 still, even after a grandmaster has played it right in my face. So white, in my opinion, needs to get pieces out because he's got a pretty large lead in development, and then open things up and go right down the middle, I think. Just come right down Main Street. E5 kind of things. Black's got a bind on d5, so it's going to be hard to push d5, but it could still happen. All right, so black wants to close up, I would think. Is there a pawn move that's going to close things up, or anything like that? I don't think so. Probably bishop g7 seems to be the most natural move right here for me. So I'm going to go bishop g7 if I'm black. All right, that was the other move I talked about earlier, b5. The e5 threat's been dealt with. And as I mentioned earlier, after e5, the threat of e5 has been dealt with, then b5 could be played. So there's that. White needs to develop. Bishop e2, bishop e2 is probably best here. Or is it? See, bishop e2 comes with the idea of castling kingside, but you have the g and h pawns that can get some mobility pretty quickly. For instance, the move g4 comes with tempo, and following that would be something like h5, h4, and then you've got a lot of pressure all of a sudden on the castle king position. So castling kingside may be something that white wants to consider throwing out. So possibly, and you've got, you know what? You've got some pawns nearing the fort on the queen side as well. So neither side right here is really comfortable with their king safety, in my opinion. So what does white want to do about that? I would guess that white wants to go ahead and develop and try to get his attack going first, with both kings stuck in the center, and the center is pretty fluid right now. I would say that white wants to get developed and get his pieces moving as quickly as possible. So is there a square c2, d2, or e2 in which the queen is going to be the most effective? As I mentioned earlier, e4 can push to e5 a lot easier than d4 can push to d5 in the center, meaning that this diagonal would be fairly open. This bishop is locked out from that diagonal, so it might be a good move to play queen c2 here. b3 might also help to attack the head of that pawn chain. a4 might help to attack sort of the middle or getting closer to the base of the pawn chain. So here are the candidate moves that I've come up with for white. Bishop e2, queen c2, b3, a4. I don't see anything right off the bat that would be strategically something I'd look at besides those moves. Now, b3 and a4 are going to completely discount or throw out the idea of castling on queenside. So maybe white wants to get a little bit more flexible of a move before committing to something like that. So immediately I'll narrow it down to queen c2 or bishop e2. And just for the sake of some time here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to decide between the two. I'll just go with a matter of taste. I would say that I'm going to go with queen c2 here. Boy, it's close between the two moves for me. and I would have to do some heavy calculation with things like G4 and B4 before I decide for sure which one I want to do. Let's just go with Queen C2 and see what White does. Neither, of course. Not a move I looked at. And I did briefly look at H3 to see if it would head off any G4 pushes. However, I discarded it because, going back and looking here, I looked at H3 to see if it would help stop G4, and of course it really doesn't. What it does is allows White to have some, or sorry, Black to have some H-file activity, or maybe White has the H-file activity here. Anyway, it doesn't look bad. It doesn't look bad. So let's go back and look at what actually happened here. What did Sambuev actually play? He played H4. Reason being, if takes, then bishop takes H4 is a nice diagonal for the bishop to renew the threat on F6 of playing E5. So that's fine. But what does it do against something like G4? Why can't Black play G4 here? And what would White do in that case? Something like Knight H2? This looks like something that I might be interested in, but that seems to just really lock in the H2 knight, so I'm not sure that's a good idea. What about Knight D2 here? Or even Knight E5? Knight E5 seems okay-ish, but I don't know why Black couldn't just play Bishop D6. So Knight D2. And why is this okay for White? Does it probably locks up the king side is probably why. I mean, how else can Black progress in an attack on the king side here? It doesn't look easy. Are we looking at things like Bishop D6 here? And if takes, which is probably a good idea for White, then Queen takes D6. And do we have some pressure mounting with G3? See, that seems okay to me. I don't. Oh no, we have. Of course, you can't do that because you have E5. So that's bad for Black. So I guess that's probably what White sees. I'm not really sure. Looks reasonable. So what does Black do in response here? Obviously not takes, obviously not pushes, so probably maintains that tension there on G5 and H4. So Black needs to, again, I'm going to go back to developing G7. Now Bishop G7, I don't, at this current moment, like, because the bishop seems, several of these variations I've looked at, the bishops come to D6. So it might be a good idea to keep that option available. I still think White looks a lot better in these positions. Black is having a lot of trouble developing and isn't getting any kingside attack here. So right now Bishop D6, Bishop takes D6, Queen D6, still he runs into E5. Bishop E7 might allow kingside castling, and even though it's a little hairy over there, it's, well, after H4 it's definitely going to get hairy. So once again, I don't think that Black wants to castle kingside, so we're not in a hurry to play bishop to anywhere unless we feel the need to, unless that's the position, or I'm sorry, unless that's the piece that we want to develop next. So developing a queenside piece like Bishop B7 might be fun, or developing the queen. So Bishop G7 and Bishop B7 seem to be the logical choices for Black. I don't like either G or H pawn push right now. I don't like. What about B4? Didn't look at that. B4 knight somewhere. C3. B4 knight somewhere C3. What? Did I just miss? Yeah. That's probably not the best square for the knight, but just looking at the pawn position here. Is this worth anything to black, just to open up on that side. Because I was looking at maybe bishop b4 and queen a5 here. And is the fact that black can't really castle kingside and is going to stay in the center, is this enough activity for black to justify? Because I think black threw a pawn there, didn't he? Yeah, there's 6 each, so black was up a pawn. But, you know, that's a gambit pawn, so if black gets activity out of this, then great. There's just still no development going on for black. Black is extremely underdeveloped at this point. So, I sort of like b4. I think that's an interesting idea. So the 3 candidate moves for black that he can choose from in my book here are bishop g7, bishop b7, and b4. We'll see which one he chooses. I'm leaning b4 right now, but we'll see. Of course, it's the move that I said is bad. g4, but it was the first move I looked at, so there's that. I just didn't analyze it thoroughly, and who's going to analyze it thoroughly when I'm trying to stay under 30 minutes here? I think I'm already up to 19, so this is never going to happen. But, you know, this may be a short game. I don't know. Let's see. I discarded knight h2. But what about knight h2, f3 after h5? Because knight h2, h5 seems super, super natural to me. I mean, what are the other options? G1 looks terrible, just, you know, theoretically seems awful. E5 or D2. I mean, I'm just screaming, I'm going to have to go to knight D2 here. So I'm going to say as white it's knight D2, just an effort to speed things up here. E5, okay, knight E5. What am I, like 1 correct guess out of 15 so far? That's pretty cool. Knight E5 with the idea of all the other squares suck. Well, it attacks G4, but I mean H5 should be next. Is there a direct threat? There's not a direct threat, right? I mean, it's not like knight C6 is hanging here or anything, or knight takes C6 is hanging, or it's like there's no knight G7 or anything like that that's gonna get the king to stay in the center, which he probably is anyway. So the direct threat is just G4. So I mean, I'm thinking black needs to play H5 here. Just seems super obvious to me. So let's see. Big fat huge sigh. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. Why did black not take on G4? So there's going to be like some sort of discovery with C5 here. So let's look at the variation. Knight takes, and just this possible variation, knight takes, and queen takes. And now something like C5 is going to open up one attacker on a piece that's already defended, you know? Well, I mean, it threatens to open up the center. So you look at this, and now you have some tension here with the D4 and C5 pawn that's going to be interesting. Because, you know, considering takes and bishop C5 is obviously looking pretty good for black. All of a sudden our bishops are strong. White's bishop's kind of, well, I mean, the G3 bishop is pretty good. But I don't think either bishop is as strong as either of black's bishops. We've got some open lines. And this to me, there's a little bit more air around the white king in this position than there was. So that's probably what he's doing. It does seem to forfeit the G4 pawn a little easily. Again, black's up a pawn and he can afford to do that. So maybe it's a good idea. Maybe black would like to utilize the G file. Okay, how does white deal with this threat of C5 opening up the center and what? Like bishop D6 still looks like it could happen. So maybe it's just this. Maybe it's just as simple as this. Black is not as concerned about a single pawn as he is his extreme lack of development at this stage of the game. Let's say that and move on. So if I'm white here, even after that variation I just pointed out, I still probably capture the G4 pawn because can you really leave it there? It's going to be pretty cramping. Is it really though? Why not just bishop e2 pile? No, because h5 can come at any time. So maybe it's a good idea for white to snatch it right away. before black completely locks it up with h5. I mean, bishop e2 looks like it just puts one too many attackers on it for black to ever handle, and h5 just rules that out completely, so no. Okay, so moving on, let's just get some candidate moves for white. Knight takes g4, bishop e2 is a candidate move, even though it doesn't do what I thought it did just a second ago, or what I would like it to do. Bishop e2 also takes away e2 for the knight in case b4 is played. And that's a big deal, you know? Looking at the variation bishop e2 and b4, where does this knight go right now? Every square is taken away except b1. And that's pretty ugly. So I'm going to rule out bishop e2 based on that variation. We still have the possibility of queen e2, I'm sorry, queen c2. One problem I have now, I'm not sure I like that knight on e5, man. That's really cramping things. I mean, I can't push e5, for instance. And where's it? It's got to go. I mean, it's got to be knight g4. It's just got to be knight g4. I'm going to go ahead and commit to knight takes g4. Let's see what white does. Uber Psi. Okay, so another. This is what it seems like. Just seems like the third or fourth move in a row where I said no, he can't possibly do that, and then step forward and he does exactly that. So why not h5 here? I mean, I'm just losing the plot quickly now. So h5 seems super obvious to me. Let's move it. No. Okay, knight d7. Still trying to develop. White has to take the g5 pawn now, or g4 pawn now, right? Knight g4. Hooray, okay. So I know I skipped through a little bit there, but I mean, I really think black is just developing, trying to get pieces out. It just seems like that's what he has to be doing. And white's piling up on the g4 pawn to make sure. I really don't know that black couldn't have taken a tempo just to lock things up there with h5. But there may be something to keeping the pawn on h6 that black's thinking. I don't know what it is, but it could be. Alright, so plans going forward here. We're starting to get a little bit more development for black. Neither king is safe yet, nor probably will be. So we're looking at maybe opening up the center with some initiative for one of the sides. So white's recaptured the gambit pawn at this point. Black's pawns are shattered a little bit. It seems to me that black would like to get going either in the center or on the queen side at this point. Although, you know what? Now that the g-pawn is gone, the king side pawn storm is a lot less of a threat. Castling may be okay now. In fact, I'm going to say for white, I think castling is good. So black could probably abandon the king side or the queen side pawn storm idea. And probably wants to lock it down in the center, if he can, and not open things up. And I was about to say that it might be possible that black could castle on the queen side now, but that bishop on g3 still is just a huge thorn. So no, black wants to stay in the center, and bishop d6 is now out for black since the knight has developed to d7. But it would be good for black to get rid of that active g3 bishop. It's just on a super diagonal there. I mean, that is a beautiful diagonal. It really hurts black, I think. Black could have a lot more options if that bishop on g3 was not there. Okay, we need to make a decision here about how black should proceed, and I have no idea what it is. h5 could come with tempo now that the pawn's gone. I just don't see the point. I mean, does h5, knight moves, knight g5, knight takes g5? I mean, it looks silly to me. So I don't think there's a way to get at anything there. We could potentially attack e5 or e4 twice by playing c5 here. We're going to really open things up if we do that. Is that something we want? We'll look at this variation just to see what happens. c5, knight takes, right?
Check.
On a trackpad here, so I can't move as fast as I can talk. Um, right now, e4 is attacked twice by black and defended only by the knight on c3. So a move is probably warranted here or protecting somehow. I mean, bishop f3 sort of looks okay-ish. Can come with some discoveries on b7, playing e5. So this looks okay. I really think, though, that the whole point of the bishop being on b7 for black was to play c5 at some point. c5 is extra protected by bishop and knight. So it seems like it could be something that black might want to do. I'm going to go ahead and say c5 is a potential move, and I don't see a whole lot of other plans. So let's go with c5 for black. Okay, he does take here. I thought this was probably bad because it gives white some extra development, getting the bishop out of e2 and up to g4. Remember that the bishop on e2 kind of blocked in the c3 knight a little bit more than I was comfortable with. So to me that seems like something I wouldn't have wanted to do. But obviously white's going to recapture it. And what's going to happen now? See, white's bishops now look a lot better on g3 and g4 than they did a couple of moves ago. G4, the g3 bishop, whatever I said, the g3 bishop is obviously a lot stronger than that light square bishop was, but this seems a lot better. It seems to, maybe not. Well, I mean, the bishop wasn't doing anything on e2, other than just being defensive. So this does seem like it could have some active roles, though it's just running into granite on e6 right now, so maybe not. All right, we'll look at c5 now. Is c5 now any different? Okay, so right away I think knight f6, bishop moves c5. I'm going to say knight f6 is the move here. Let's see if it is. All right, so we have a developing move. Is black thinking of castling kingside all of a sudden? What about black castling kingside and concentrating on attacking on the queen side? That could be a potential plan with the b4 stuff that I looked at, b4 and c5 stuff that I've been looking at on the queen side. So that could be what black is trying to do here. If I'm white, I go ahead and castle at this point. I think that both sides have dealt with enough issues over on the king side that it's kind of died down a little bit. I think with white re-emerging with some trumps there, those two bishops. By the way, material imbalance here. It's completely even material-wise, and both sides have two bishops. So there's no real imbalance material-wise at all. The big imbalances are king safety and pawn structure. So c6 can be weak for black, and white doesn't really have any potentially weak pawns other than h4, but it's not going to be a weakness anytime soon. There's no open files for the rooks, so rooks aren't a big deal right now. The center belongs to white mostly. Black's doing a good job of sort of contesting it with pieces, but the pawns are restricted a lot. I mean, we have the c6 pawn and e6 pawn doing a little bit of work on d5, that bind that we talked about earlier. But the bishops are looking at the center from the distance, and the d7 knight is looking at a couple of centralized squares. But, I mean, d4 and e4 are sitting there awfully proud right now. So black is striking at that from the distance a little bit. Bishop g7, looking at d4, protected right now, so there isn't a whole lot of issues. That e5 push has been kind of in the air for a long time, but it doesn't seem that it does anything yet, other than blocking a really good bishop on g3. So, I mean, to stop the g7 pawn from having a lot of scope, you might play e5, but I think it limits your own bishop's scope more than that. So e5 is ruled out. If I'm white, I castle queenside here. I'm sorry, castle kingside here. Okay, so I mean, I get a point on the board. That's actually a pretty good feeling. I've been decimated this whole game, so I'm happy about that. I think I'm past the 30-minute mark. I need to move it. I'm going to kind of pick up the pace a little here. I have no idea how many moves are coming, so I mean, this could be a 50-move game. And I think the closer I get to the end game, the less I understand about the end game. The closer I get to the end game, the more I'll probably just speed it up and just kind of show the game. So black c5. I mean, I'm just going to idly guess some moves for a while. c5 and knight f6 look okay. Castles could also happen. So let's go with one of those three moves. Okay, there's the b4 idea I had a long time ago. Knight e2 probably. Knight e2 or knight a4. What does knight a4 do? Can knight a4 get to c5 and sit there for a while? Not really, because the d7 knight's sort of challenging that square a little bit, and you just have a trade. So that doesn't do anything active. So does rerouting through e2 help any? Maybe. Knight e2 up to f4 could have some attacking possibilities. You could really get your pieces over the king side quickly there, and then it might be bad for black to castle again. So let's just see what happens. Okay, there's the a4. And queen e7 for some reason, who knows. This is where I get a little despondent at not knowing what's going on. Well, here's why. I mean, here's an obvious reason why. If white were to play knight c5, then just takes would lose a pawn on c5. So that could be as simple as that idea is. And this, honestly, that's why I ruled out knight a4 to begin with. Is because black could have something as simple as queen e7 to win that pawn. That pawn is going to stink on c5 a little bit. So I don't see the point. All right, moving forward, white has, again, attacking ideas in the center. His knight is a little silly on a4 right now for whatever reason. Doesn't have many escape squares to come back to if it gets attacked on a4. So why ever it's there, I don't know. So what is white going to do going forward? Would something like f4 be in the cards at all? f4, f5 kind of ideas? And then we're really opening up lines to the king. I don't know. I mean, I kind of like that. I think that's interesting. f4 might be a little too forward, but I mean, it could be a wild idea. Let's see what actually happens here. Yeah. See, I did look over here and see if, because to me the knight on a4 is really silly, and I wouldn't. The f4 idea probably fails to the fact that the knight is on a4 and can't help at all. And black's pieces can probably get over there fairly quickly. Certainly, everything but the b7 knight can get over there fairly quickly. And the b7 knight can maybe cause some problems on e4 on the way. Maybe grab a tempo of some sort. So yeah, it's probably too soon for f4. So a3, b3, allowing the knight to come back to c3 would be something. a3, b takes a3. a3, b takes a3. I mean, now also we've got, no matter what, we're going to have the c3 square to come back to, because that pawn's not going to stay on b4. So, yeah, I see the point of a3. I don't know why. I just don't know why it went there in the first place. That's puzzling. If somebody can offer some answers for that, I would appreciate it. I don't understand why the knight's on a4 at all. And then now we have to do this a3 business to get back into it. Maybe it's because knight a4 allowed the a3 stuff, which is going to close off the queen side from black's pawns. I don't know. Let's go forward. So black does castle now, and that seems okay-ish. For a while now, we've had the fireworks on the king side died down enough to where that's been at least something to consider. But it does make me think f4 needs to be coming soon. White can get an attack over there fairly easily, while black can't do a whole lot about it. So e5 might close off the center enough to warrant. Let's look at e5, f4, f5. Would be an idea for white. But first, a takes b4. A takes, queen takes, knight c3, knight c2. No, yikes. Where am I at? Knight c3 might be okay. Looking at that position. Boom, boom. We have some issues on d6 here that could happen. By the way, we had those before. There's nobody protecting d6 yet for white, so it can't happen yet. But it's something to worry about on that diagonal there. We're losing b2 here, aren't we? if we play c3, knight c3. So probably not a good idea for white yet. Well, let's see what white does. We need to move forward in this game. Okay, and then he doesn't play queen takes for whatever reason, probably because there's going to be issues on the king side soon. And he's just said, okay, you can have that pawn. So let's see. Black is thrusting f5 here. And where does white want to go with the g4 bishop? Would it be possible to reroute it e2 over to c4? Looks okay. So bishop e2, bishop a6. It seems passive for black. Bishop e2 is, you know, it's pretty attacking. I mean, it's something I would definitely strongly consider as white. Oh, more email getting in the way. That pop-up comes onto the screen a little bit, and I'm sorry about that. Not too big a deal, though. Bishop e2, attacking c4, and black responds with... I don't know. That's what I'm thinking, bishop e2. Let's see what white actually does. Yeah, swap first, but you still got to move it, so... Okay, threaten the queen first. We're going to pick it up here, and that's why, I mean, I'm up to 40 minutes, but we got to go. Got to go. There's that. Fine. Now what about white? Back to h3. So this, he's put pressure on the... Okay, obviously attacking c4 is not in the cards anymore. This is all stuff I've looked at briefly, so this is not unexpected, just a move order kind of a thing. I didn't look at h3 for the bishop, but it makes a little bit more sense since we took a different line. So let's just go ahead and kind of step through the rest of the game, and I'll make some comments here and there, just because we're up to 40 minutes now. All right, so black is throwing that f4 pawn down white's throat. Can't take. Can we counterattack first? Something like bishop e6. So either bishop e6 or bishop h2 are immediately what I look at. Okay, bishop h2. Black is honestly starting to look better here. His king is not very safe, but he's done a good job over the last few moves of pushing the f-pawn back at white and opening up space for himself. If he can get those bishops out of their little closet they're in, then this is going to be a tactical fight. And it may be worth another video sometime to look at the last half of this. In fact, what I may do is just step through it now and then make another video on the second half, the tactics that happen in the second half. I'm saying second half. To me, this looks like this is going to go on for another 20 moves at least. So I'm going to guess, you know, around a 40 or 50 move game. And the second half of the game could be probably more interesting to go through in a kind of a tactical analysis sense. So I may put that on hold. Here's what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to step through it fairly quickly and put the rest of the game on video, and then I'll hold in my pocket the option to make another video on the second half of it to look at some things that were interesting about the game. I would love to do it, but the video is getting pretty long right now. So here we go. We're still, yeah, now all of a sudden we're getting some bishops out. I would think that white is going to be fighting for getting that that dark square bishop out soon. So here's some trades. Yeah, I mean, as soon as I saw rook a8, I was thinking that can't be right. Let's just look. I mean, yeah, okay, I see. So that probably works. There are definitely tactics going on here, guys. So some of those things might be worth looking at in more depth. I might look at it with a friend and see what they think about this game. We're up to move 35, so that's 14 more moves since I decided to do this. Okay, that is the end of the game. So let's take a look at what the position's like here. It looks like black probably resigned just based on the activity of white's pieces. So what's going on here? Black needs to respond to the threat of bishop g7, king takes. What would be the continuation? Maybe it's just the passed e-pawn, man. Uh, let's put Houdini on it just so I can have some closure to this video without drawing out another 10 minutes while I try to figure it out. It could happen, you know. It could happen. Oh, I hate that. Scooch, scooch, scooch. Oh, the score is 300, which I assume is forced mate, right? So we'll look at Houdini's line here. Let's click auto start. Queen a6, queen takes a6. We're just delaying. That's all that is. King h7. It's a two bishop mate, isn't it? I don't know, man. This is weird. Let's go back. No, not that. Good grief, I hit the wrong button. Let's go back here. And let's look at bishop takes. Oh, it's just queen takes h6. That's why they pay me the big bucks to make that kind of mistake on camera. So what about something like rook g8? Still queen takes h6. Yeah, that's the big threat is queen takes h6. I mean, the bishop's pinned here, so that's the whole idea. So black doesn't need to respond to bishop takes g7. He needs to respond to queen takes h6. So is there a way to do that? That's what queen a6 was about. I see now. Yeah, there's no way to stop it. So that's a good move. And it's kind of the realization of that statement I made. If that bishop can ever get off of h2, you know, black could be in a world of hurt. And he was. Pretty much the very first move he came out of there. Okay, well that was interesting. There's some tactics in the second half. Obviously I'm not going to spend any more time in this video looking at them. But it was fun to do that. I definitely am considering making a second video for moves 21 through 35 of that game. So thanks for watching it. Please leave some comments and don't be too brutal on me about having another 44-minute video. I really did try, but man, it's hard in these games. It really is difficult. Maybe I should just embrace it and go with it. So leave suggestions and tell me what you think about all that. And